All right, good morning. My name is Michael Gable, representing the Designated Federal Officer, or DFO. As the alternate DFO for the Defense Innovation Board, I have a few procedural remarks to share. This board is a discretionary independent advisory board operated under the Federal Advisory Committee Act and the Government in the Sunshine Act. The board will now convene its public session. Today's meeting was announced in the Federal Register notice posted on October 16, 2017. In that notice, the public was invited to submit written comments no later than October 20, 2017, to allow the board members sufficient time to consider the comments. 3 comments were received and were presented to the board members in advance of today's meeting. All will be included in the public record. There have been no substantive changes to the meeting's agenda published in that Federal Registry notice. However, depending on time constraints, all the topics presented in that notice may or may not be covered today. Further, and again based on time constraints, there may be an opportunity for comments to the board directly at the end of today's meeting. I would like to point out that we have 2 board members who have called in to participate in the public meeting. Also, the meeting is being recorded and live streamed to allow members of the public to attend virtually. Welcome, and with that, I now turn the meeting over to the board's Executive Director, Joshua Marcuse, for opening remarks and introduction of our board.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks to our members of the public who are watching online. This is our 5th public meeting since our first meeting about 1 year ago, last October, and it's amazing how much progress has been made and how much discussion we've had. We're excited to continue that dialogue today. Let me introduce our board members first. Our chair, Dr. Eric Schmidt. He is joined by Dr. Eric Lander, Dr. Michael McQuaid, Mr. Milo Medine, Dr. Richard Murray, Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, Ms. Marnie Levine on the line, and also Ms. Jan Polka on the line. Our main plan for the day is we're going to discuss 4 potential recommendations, all topics that mainly deal with accelerating innovation in the department, addressing the challenges of speed, and engaging the workforce in that discussion and creating a culture of innovation in the department. We'll begin by asking each board member to introduce these 4 different ideas and topics. They'll lay them out in the main idea, the outline of these ideas. Then the board members will deliberate on these ideas in public. Following that, we've invited a diverse group of service members as subject matter experts to offer their perspective on some of the challenges that service members face innovating. All the services are represented. We have general officers and we have enlisted personnel as well, part of that discussion. At that point, we'll turn to Dr. McQuaid, who's one of the co-chairs of the Science and Technology Subcommittee. He'll have some discussion with all of us about what the subcommittee will be focusing on in the year to come. And then we'll have the opportunity to hear from you, which the board members often tell me is the best part for them. So we will have comment cards circulated. If you'd like to make very brief remarks, please try to hold it to 2 minutes. Tell us what your topic is, your information, hand it to the aisles. Members of my team will collect them, bring them to me, and then we'll call upon as many people as we have time for. Then we'll turn it back to Eric to adjourn. So without any further ado, Eric, please take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Josh, and thank you all for coming. I want to start by thanking 1776 for hosting this, a new workspace, which makes an awful lot of sense to me. And I also wanted to personally take a minute and congratulate the members of the Defense Department and the military over an outstanding military victory in the Raqqa area in the last few weeks. So we have a lot of reasons to think that the strategy worked really well. This board has spent an awful lot of time chatting, visiting, and so forth over the last year, and it's going well. And there's lots of reasons to think that people are listening. We're beginning to feel like we're having an impact. And we're very much looking forward to doing this over the next year and continuing with the support, of course, of the Secretary of Defense. Based on the last sort of year and a half, site visits, if you will, we've made 12 recommendations that the military are now reviewing. I'm told they're making great progress. We'll see. We have other meetings with some of the players today. But I'm quite optimistic that this model is working. And I think it shows a hunger for change, an interest in new things, and a modernization process that matters a great deal. And the Secretary of Defense and his staff have been incredibly supportive of this whole maneuver. Since our last meeting in July, which we held in Silicon Valley, we have done a number of other visits, I think the most notable being U.S. Armed Forces Japan, U.S. Armed Forces Korea. And if you want to sort of understand complexity, that's a great place to go visit and understand complex strategy, complex technology, complex personnel issues. and we were extremely well hosted there. So what I thought we could do is jump, with that sort of an intro, jump right to a presentation. I think the way this works, Josh, if I get the protocol right, is we are supposed to introduce that we have a problem or an idea for a discussion, and we're interested in your responses to that. So I thought maybe we should start with Milo to my left, who wants to talk a little bit about the concept of an accelerator. Since we're in 1776 anyway, why don't we have an accelerator? Milo?
Thank you. I think, you know, as we've gone and talked to many groups in the defense establishment, particularly more junior people in the both industry and in the military, the problems are stated in terms of speed. Sort of how do we actually move faster? How do we actually make decisions quicker? How do we reduce the time cycles to adapt to adversary moves, emerging technologies, and surprises? And I think one of the things that's been really clear is the DoD today, the enterprise writ large, is really not optimized for speed. There's a lot of, I mean, some of you are smiling in here. I'm sure I'm not telling you something that's not obvious.
I think that's why they're here.
Yes, indeed. Part of the nature here is there's a lot of apparatus that exists to try and optimize for cost. But I actually think if you optimize for speed, you'll get cost as a byproduct, because it's generally very hard to spend money quickly. So if you actually can drive a process that's optimizing for speed, for time, for rapid decision making, I think you'll actually get cost as a side benefit as well. Programs that take far longer are much more likely to have significant cost overruns. And so I think the focus is really also on how do you get requirements iteration done in this process. Programs that run a very long time, the requirements change, right? Because the technology that's actually being used to deal with the requirements is changing at a very rapid pace. It's very difficult to predict what technology is going to be available 20 years from now. It's much easier to do that in the next 3 or 4 years and being able to integrate that into weapon systems and other support systems. So I think DoD is always going to need to seek major science and technology advances and ways to accelerate these advances through the prototype and production stage. The DoD has a historical expertise in that, but it seems to have atrophied over the last few decades. And I think the launch of the new DDR&E organization coming up this year will have an opportunity to sort of re-baseline this process, and we're excited to work with whoever is going to take that over to try and provide advice and counsel on that. Part of the question we're wrestling as a board, I think, is how do you actually take that focus on time optimization and make it be effective in the organization? We have organizations like the DIUX and the DDS who are doing that well today. SCO as well is doing that, but it's not something that is, those organizations move sort of outside the process. And the question is really, do we need to put together a new accelerator to do that even more? Or do we try and take chunks of the mainline process and try and change those incentives? So I think what we're trying to figure out is what kind of, is a new org or existing org where we can identify and prioritize a small number of most critical warfighting problems, as defined by the DEPSEC. These are cross-functional, not necessarily specifically service-driven problems, and assemble cross-functional teams across organizational boundaries to attack them. That's what we do in industry. Where you've got a big problem in a company, you take your best folks from across that company, put those people on a Tiger team and attack it. And you equip them with the decision-making ability to actually execute. And I think we're trying to figure out what the right mechanism is to accomplish that. And then be able to rapidly prototype, experiment, and then go into production, cross the sort of valley of death that everyone normally talks about. I think it's too ambitious to try and solve that problem for all systems, but the question is, are there a certain set of problems that can be attacked reasonably this way? And we're in the process of talking with the department about what kind of structures can be put into place to make this be more effective. We have to change the pace of innovation in the department, and getting everybody focused on the right variable, I think, is going to yield good results if we can accomplish that.
Okay, thank you. So I think, Milo, you wanted us, Josh, you wanted us to go in and talk about the other three, and then we'll come back to a sort of a general conversation on, does this list make sense? Is Jen on the phone? See if the technology works. Yes? Shall we try Marnie?
Same line.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, why don't you go ahead?
Does that mean you can hear me?
Yes,
Marnie?
yes, we can. Yes, yes, Marnie. Yes, Marnie.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be with you, in some fashion at least. I'm not trying to make a point by calling in about technology, but it's definitely not lost on me. But I'm sorry not to be there in person, and thanks for bearing with me over the phone. I am talking about Recommendation 15, which is about creating a new career field focused on innovation, rapid capability development and acquisition, data science and science technology, engineering and math, STEM skill sets. I think we can all appreciate that the conflicts of the future will have a technology dimension, and can agree that meeting these challenges will require the Department of Defense to establish STEM skills as a core competency. So Recommendation 15 is about making sure that we establish a personnel system that reflects this need. The Department of Defense leaders often underscore the importance of the STEM disciplines, but there is currently no sufficient formal process in place to recruit, train, develop, and sustain a core workforce with these skill sets. What we found is that within each service, there's no career field for these areas of expertise, with a few minor exceptions. While assembling subject matter experts within branches is standard practice across the services, for example, infantry, maintenance, pilots, and so forth, this has not yet occurred for STEM skill sets. The lack of specialized STEM career field has a number of intended consequences. It hinders recruitment and it hinders retention. So I'm going to talk about both. First, it hinders recruitment. At a previous board meeting, I spoke about the importance of increasing recruitment of individuals in STEM fields. But recruitment can't actually be done in silo. In order to recruit top talent, the department needs to demonstrate that it is a place where individuals can build careers in STEM. Without a clear and viable career path for STEM specialists, recruitment will continue to be an uphill battle, especially when these skills are in high demand in the private sector. We compete in the private sector fiercely with one another for the top engineers, computer scientists, software writers, coders, and network administrators. And not only do we do this with significant resources at our disposal, but we can offer individuals a clear career trajectory and promotion within their area of expertise. The other problem here is that it hinders recruitment. The other problem, aside from recruitment, is that it hinders retainment. Without a clear career field, individuals who specialize in STEM fields are systematically disadvantaged in the promotion process and are rarely given the right opportunities to develop, advance, and apply their skills and knowledge. Existing service members with these skill sets often become frustrated due to a lack of utilization and continued development, resulting in their talents being lost to the private sector. And service members who have the opportunity to apply these skill sets on a limited basis are forced back to their basic branch in order to remain competitive for advancement. This results in the loss of focused talent on emerging challenges or the loss of this talent. All of this seriously undermines the department's ability to build the force that we need to address the emerging technological challenges that are changing the character of warfare. So recommendation 15 would solve this problem by establishing a branch for these skill sets. This would enable increased opportunities for recruiting, retainment, and development of new and existing service members. Much like the newly created cyber and nuclear propulsion, aviation, and missile defense branches allow for specialization and focus on core departmental challenges, this new branch would allow for more rapid and efficient adoption, integration, and iteration of new technologies, as is the norm in private industry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Marnie. It turns out we had inadvertently muted Jen, who was ready and shouting at us, but we could not hear her. Jen, are you unmuted and free to speak?
I am here, and it may well have been my fault. Apologies.
Okay.
And apologies for not being there today.
Okay, so why don't you go ahead? Thank you very much.
Sure. I am going to talk a little bit about recommendation 14, elevating new ideas in DoD, and it also has to do with human capital and the personnel system. And I'll just start by saying that one of the things that's just been so striking in I think all of our tenure on this board, and really so encouraging, is that there is no shortage of innovation in the Defense Department. There's no shortage of innovative people. There's no shortage of people who are forward-leaning and care deeply about this institution and its capabilities and want to make the institution more innovative, more competitive, and a better place for people to work who really want not just to do what they were brought in to do, but to also change the system for the better. And this recommendation is very much based in that. It starts out by saying that DoD does not have an innovation problem, it has an innovation adoption problem. And this recommendation is really taking a look at a part of the DoD, which is the up or out personnel system. That is, while it has many wonderful aspects to it and is a very well thought out system in many ways, is very limiting. And what it means is that people really have to rotate through these different positions that's designed specifically to make everybody interchangeable. And one of the significant downsides of this system is that ideas that are innovative, that are going to help change and bring the DoD squarely into the 21st and position for the 22nd century, are really asked to move on from those ideas instead of being able to pursue them and own them and carry them through to fruition. So a DoD elevator is essentially a carve-out to that personnel system that allows people who've got a great idea to get sort of executive sponsorship, go through a process, of course, to great ideas, and then gives them the ability to work on those ideas without being, without having to be stuck in the position that they would normally have to transition to the next time. So service members would have to apply to be removed from the up or out system. Not every idea is worth pursuing, so we want to make sure we're very selective here. And the DoD will have to establish who decides which service members are exempt. But once they are, they will be expected to secure support from high-level champions and sponsors within the DoD to shepherd and accelerate their ideas, provide some oversight and some feedback, and protect them from what we call the DoD antibodies who are looking to kill those new ideas. And if you read the full recommendation, you will hear a little bit more about some of the concerns about great ideas being killed and how this recommendation and others within set of recommendations we take are designed to stop that process of killing ideas before they have a chance to really have their impact on the DoD. Also, we will establish a cadre of advisors at any rank to provide expertise in acquisition, policy, legal regulations, funding mechanisms, technical knowledge, etc., that will help these innovators in this elevator understand what is required to implement their idea. So the idea is that they will get to follow this idea until it's done, either because it was killed and it didn't work, which certainly happens with innovation, or because it was adopted or integrated. And if it's adopted, the adopting organization should be encouraged to bring on the participants as a special implementation advisor for an agreed upon period of time to facilitate integrating the project into the larger organization. So a committee of 5 or 7 individuals will help create and review criteria every quarter to ensure that the projects are moving forward and terminate ones that aren't. The group will be composed of a mix of experts, some appointed by the Office of the Secretary and or the Deputy Secretary of Defense, or some appointed by the cadre of innovators involved in the elevator, and at least one viewed as an independent arbiter, perhaps in the private sector or academia. And again, members of the committee will be removed from day-to-day work of the elevator participants, but should possess a strong understanding of DoD's processes and operations. And this speaks to something I think the whole board has seen as well, which is you do need fresh eyes, but you also must understand the unique processes and operations of the DoD to be successful in this regard. And so there's much more to the recommendation, but I'll just wrap by saying that this is really not designed to train people to be innovators, but rather to empower the innovators that already exist in the military. And there are so many of them, and I am looking forward to seeing this recommendation get your feedback and hopefully become a way in which we take many of those innovators and tell them that their ideas are valuable, and let's pursue them.
Thank you very much. So, Neil, I'm going to ask you to comment on these to get started. This is one, because I respect your opinions immensely, but more importantly, because you're wearing my favorite outer space tie.
Oh, okay.
So those of you on the phone cannot see. Which
But were we going to go over 16 first?
Or?
Or?
I'm sorry, I forgot Richard. I was so excited about your tie. I apologize.
No problem. So I think one other recommendation that we've been talking about as a potential recommendation is the idea of establishing a training program to increase the effectiveness and velocity of technology adoption and integration within the DoD. And I think you've already heard about how important we think it is to be able to move quickly and to be able to move more quickly than our adversaries move. And that's, of course, a big challenge because the adversaries are moving really fast and they don't necessarily have the same constraints that we do. I should say that, training program may not be the word that I would use as a university professor. I think we often think about education, so maybe an education program would be one way to think about it. But there's no question that we need to figure out how to move faster. When you look at the rate at which communications and global networks and other things are changing what our adversaries can do, when you look at the impact of things like autonomy and artificial intelligence, both on potentially our own capabilities, but again, on those capabilities that can be used against us, we need to find out ways to do that. There are a lot of techniques that industry has adopted for doing that. And again, if you look at the rate at which commercial industry, and in particular things around artificial intelligence, autonomy, social networks, machine learning are moving, there are lots of things out there that we think the DoD could adopt and make better use of. And when we go out and we visit the forces and sort of ask about where the gaps are and what's going on, the system often gets blamed, and that's something we need to fix. We need to get it to where the system is going, absolutely, we know how to get things to happen quickly, and you've heard already from Milo and Marnie and Jen some of the types of things we can do there, but we have to get people to be willing to take risks and to say, yes, this is the way we're going to do that, and to try these things out. The impact of the current approach that the DoD is taking is that there's really maybe not as strong an understanding as there could be about how to move quickly. What are the ways in which industry moves these things quickly? If you look at the rate at which changes occur in the various software programs that we all use in our everyday lives, and you think about, boy, how do they get those ideas in there so quickly? That's the types of things that the DoD needs to be doing as well. And so we need better ways of having the innovation that's going on, and as has already been said, there's lots of innovation going on within the DoD, but how do we get that to lead to actual impact on DoD operations? I think that is the challenge. And again, if we can educate the people who are making those decisions in the types of tools and techniques that will allow them to do that, the types of things that are going on in industry that's allowing the United States, for example, to be so competitive right now in terms of our rate of technology adoption in the commercial world, we think that there are things that can be done there. how do we make use of the various other transactions authorities and hiring authorities that have already been given? So we go out and we say, well, you know, why can't you do this? Oh, because, right, the FAR says whatever, right? And then we go back and we sort of blame the FAR, and then we go talk to people, right? And people say, no, 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 there are other ways around that. For this, we don't have to use the FAR in this way. There is flexibility, but how do we get people to use that flexibility that exists already? So we think there may be a number of benefits by thinking about some sort of an education program, maybe modeled after the types of executive education that happens in business schools, where you try and give people new insights about how to think about things. Or, wow, there's a really cool way that I saw this being done. I went out and I spent a week in company X, and what was amazing about that was the rate at which they got young people to take new ideas and quickly have them go out and get tried out in products and do various types of testing and other things, and quickly see what worked, and then get those things that worked actually out into the field and useful. So we think that there are models that are out there, and we think that we need to find ways to get leaders really at all levels within the DoD to know more about what's going on in industry and to adopt some of those techniques that are working in industry. And so that's something we want to think about in terms of what would that look like in terms of a recommendation, and how might we propose that the DoD leadership kind of take advantage of the amazing things that are already out there in terms of the way industry is moving quickly.
Okay, thank you very much. Neil.
Sure. Just a note about my tie. The good thing about space ties, particularly those with nebulosities on it, is you can like drip spaghetti sauce on it and no one would know the difference. It'd just be another nebula, you know. Just tell people that. I've never had to wash my ties as a result. So if I can offer just some reflections on this, if you look at the structure of modern innovative businesses, it's very different from the structure of the military for clear and obvious reasons historically. Military, every military we know of, ours included, is built on the capacity to take orders and give orders. And you train a soldier to be a soldier, so one soldier can be swapped with another. A trained soldier can be swapped with another trained soldier. And so the idea is that you have this efficient operating system that is functioning in a world where the sort of the capacity to engage warfare is sort of predetermined for that system. And that's American industry at one time was that. You'd have an apprentice system, people would come in, one worker could be replaced with another worker, you just had to work hard, you can move up. And in modern times, however, the mapping of the innovation universe that's in the corporate world and the innovation universe that's in the military is not a one-to-one correspondence. And this will be the source of a lot of whatever is the challenge of implementing all of these suggestions. The idea that you can have someone who has innovative thoughts, the question then is, what do you do with that person? And each of these recommendations, they're not actually independent of one another. They all work in synchrony to enable a system that does not natively think this way, to think that way, and not only think that way or tolerate that way, but embrace it. And when I think of when I think of when you enable innovation, it's something not discussed here, but we've discussed in other contexts. Innovation means you're testing something that hasn't been done before. And you have to have room for failure there. And we have, over the recent decades, sort of built for us a culture of no failure. And when you have a culture of no failure, it's also a culture of no risk. And one thing is certain, that if you lead your life never having failed, then you are not operating at the limits of what you can possibly achieve. So in the synchrony of these ideas, we have to not only find the people who want to innovate, And they're not necessarily the ones who just have to take orders or give orders. They're the ones that are thinking in a different way. And you don't want the military to remove them from the ranks because simply because they have ideas that don't fit how the command system works. You want to keep them, you want to nurture them, and you want to reward that investment. And until these recommendations, I don't know that there was a way that you could reward someone who would be a career innovator, if I can even use that phrase. So I've just been very happy with how these deliberations have gone and what has landed on paper, not just abstract ideas, but ideas that include means of implementation. And by the very response of the attendance at this meeting, not only here but online, it tells me that there's a shared urge in the leadership represented in the organization for trying to make this happen. Otherwise, we'll get left in the cave as the rest of the world passes us by, because they certainly know the value.
These general areas, then you would like us to proceed to debate?
Yeah, I think I'd like the fact that they dovetail one another, so that they're not just four independent concepts that have to then live alone. They can reference one another for how they would create, implement, and verify its later success. Yeah.
And Eric, do you want to sort of, do you agree, disagree? Give us your perspective on the 4 plus the sum of the 12 before.
Sure. So, well, first, I very strongly agree with these recommendations, and they are a very different package of recommendations than our first 12, because they're all cultural recommendations, changing the culture of the organization. Many of our first 12 referred to particular areas that the military should focus on, but this is how we can do it. And the single most important word in all of that is speed. It's the ability to adapt to change that has been at the heart of, I think, militaries for all time, but at the beginning it was the ability to learn the lessons of the last war so you're prepared for the next war. That doesn't work as well anymore. There's learning the lessons of the last battle so you're prepared for the next battle, and that's rapidly going to become, as we move to a much more complex and partly autonomous world, learning the lessons of the last 10 minutes so that you're prepared to fight the next 10 minutes. We got to get a cultural change across the board to do that, and speed is the right organizing principle. There are things that ought to be done very slowly and carefully, but you ought to choose what those things are. Many things, you at least ought to have the choice, should we do them quickly? And our problem right now is we don't have that choice to be able to do them quickly. So the question I would throw into the mix that isn't explicitly into the recommendations, how are we going to measure that? We have folks with excellent micrometers who can measure how much something costs, but to figure out how rapidly we can get something done and actually keep some kind of metrics across the entire DoD of are we doing a better job at that will be an attendant challenge, because if the department were to embrace these recommendations, as is also the case for a business practice, for business practices across tech, we're going to actually have to know that we're doing it. So I just want to throw that up. But I think these are incredibly important packages. It's pretty radical. I think it's so encouraging to hear from the many people who we've talked to over the past months that there's a great appetite to do it. And our contribution is to help push the DoD to use its existing authorities or create a few new ones to make sure that it gets done.
Eric, can I add one thing to that, if I may? Something that we tend to cleanse in our memory, an aspect of American culture I'm closest to, and that would be our space program, where we remember that sort of golden age of having gone to the moon as us being leaders in the space program. But in fact, if you unpack the sequence of events that led to us landing on the moon, we were not proactive at all, we were reactive to the Soviet Union. They had the first satellite, They had the first human. They had the first non-human animal. They had the first human. They had the first basically everything. Space stations, first woman in space, first black person in space. And everything we did was reactive in response to those as seen as threats to our technological and military preeminence. So, but we remember it as we were leaders, but that really was not the case if you look carefully. I can tell you this, that if you implement a cultural embracement of innovation, then we will not only be reactive to what is happening now, we will guarantee that we will be proactive to any possible threat that others could imagine. Because when you have innovation at the forefront of what you do, then you're not reacting to anything. You are leading the world.
Milo and Michael, maybe a comment or two. I want to make sure we at least hear this out a bit.
Let me just disagree with you, Neil, about one
cool.
thing. I think the Department of
Hold me
Defense-
back. Hold me back.
I think the Department of Defense takes enormous amounts of risk. In fact, way too much risk. Part of the reason that but it's not risk defined in the way that you're defining it. The department takes lots of risk in terms of letting things stay the way they are. And we are, in that process, we are transferring risk from program offices and others to the warfighter. And that is not being done in an intentional way. There is not somebody saying, we're going to make a decision, we're going to take a risk by leaving this obsolete system in place. We're going to take a risk by leaving this code which is no longer supportable in place. We're going to take a risk by not allowing our systems to provide the information to the warfighter they need to be able to make decisions quickly. We're going to leave things the way they are. And that kind of risk is that kind of risk is spread through the entire department. That's got to change because it is a very dangerous gamble, in my opinion. And I also think the department, by focusing too much on process, anesthetizes itself to that risk. Because if we go check the boxes in the process, then we've done the right kind of thing, no matter what the outcome is supposed to be. Process does not trump competence. Fundamental decision-making, making decisions at speed, requires people who have the requisite knowledge and the trade space of how to make decisions in an engineering set of compromises to be able to make those decisions, not check the box in process. Till we get a focus on really getting the competent people who have the requisite information in the room and not focusing on a particular kind of process for decision making, I don't think we're ever going to be able to move at the speed that the department needs to. And I think the leadership understands this and wants to change that.
Michael?
Wow. So Milo. So it's, first of all, just in bold terms, I fully support the direction these 4 recommendations are going. As my colleagues have said, they are highly interrelated, and I want to just bring sort of 2 points on the table. Richard mentioned clearly an issue around education up and down the organization around what it really means to be innovative, and also where and how lots of these new emerging technologies may be applicable to the mission space. And if you listen to Jen's recommendation, it was about creating essentially a parallel track for innovators so they don't get trapped in the up and out. I have this great idea, I have 2 years to work on it, just as it comes to fruition, I have to go do something else because I'm an interchangeable person. So I think that's a very, very strong and important part of what we need to do. The one sort of additional thought I would throw into the mix is we can't, when it's all said and done, end up with the innovators over here and the everybody else over here. So part of the education mission that Richard talked about is to make sure that doesn't happen. But I also want to be sure that we look at these people that we are going to put through a different career track or recommend through a different career track, and some portion or percentage of those, I want to look back in some number of years and say they are in senior line positions in the organization because they have been through a world of innovation and a world of tech and a world of training. I don't want to end up with a senior leadership that treats that group over there like that's the place we go for cool stuff, and this is the place we go over here to execute stuff. So how we integrate those into the organization, I think, has to be part of the thinking in the way these four things come together.
Thank you, Michael. I remember talking to one young officer who was exquisitely trained in cybersecurity, who was approaching the end of a 2-year appointment, who was going to be transferred away from cybersecurity into something which he viewed as far less strategic for our nation because of this system. With the risk of engaging the telephone gods again, Jen and Marnie, can you comment on any of this or say anything you'd like?
This is Jen. I'll just stress something that everyone has spoken about again, which is retention. And so, as I think Milo was just speaking, it's not just that we want to retain these, that we want these people to be in leadership positions, and we want to have fewer stories of people who said, I had this great idea and I had to go pursue it outside of the Department of Defense. We are hearing too many of those stories, and those are people who could be there doing this work, changing the DoD and creating a space for others. So let's keep them.
My experience as an executive in private sector is that changing culture is almost impossible. So we thought our first 12 recommendations were challenging. Are there final comments about this area? Gentlemen, ladies? Okay. Josh, is it appropriate now to start listening to the presentations?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you all for this. Thank you guys and ladies, and let's go with the presentations.
Great. We'll have 5 presentations. This is a new format where we're going to hear from a senior leader, and then we're going to hear from 4 other practitioners who are engaging with the issues on the agenda. So our senior leader for this meeting is General Stephen Wilson, Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force.
And thank you, General, for coming.
Well, good morning. Trying to get into the spirit of things. I hope that says DIB. So on behalf of the Secretary-in-Chief, we're really excited to partner with you all. We have been following your work and really admiring some of the suggestions that are coming out, and looking forward to working this further. What I thought I'd do is spend a couple minutes kind of diving into what's important to our Air Force, our airmen, and what we're doing about it in this quest to change all the things you've just talked about in terms of culture and technology and adoption. And as Josh has said many times before, I don't think we have an innovation problem, we have an innovation adoption problem. But if you hear nothing else, know that we need your help. We need your help to unleash this spirit of innovation throughout our Air Force, but more broadly throughout the Department of Defense. If I go to the next slide, please. You'll see the Secretary's kind of outlined our 5 priorities. If I were to show you to them, what you'll see on the left side of the screen talks about things. It talks about modernization and equipment and how to be ready for the current fight and how to modernize going forward. The other side of the screen talks about people, whether it be our talents in the Air Force, developing exceptional leaders, how do we partner with our allies, and in the middle you see kind of spearheaded is innovation, and I think it underpins all that, and all those are kind of weighted equal on the paths that we're trying to move our Air Force forward across those 5 key lines. But in context, we realize that like all of our services, when we left for Desert Storm, we haven't come back. And since that time, our military has gotten about 40% smaller. Where we used to produce about 250 airplanes a year, we're now producing about 20 airplanes a year, and we've been doing that for the last 15 years. So our equipment's gotten older, our forces got smaller, and quite frankly, I think we're too small for what our nation's asking us to do. And the impacts are clear as we see this world changing around us in this competition, and I'll talk about that next. Next slide, please. So if I was focused in the middle, I call this the great power competition that's going on across the world today. If I was speaking in an audience in February of 2014 and talking about the threats facing the military, here's things I didn't talk about. I didn't talk about Ukraine or Crimea. I didn't talk about ISIS or ISIL. I didn't talk about Boko Haram. I didn't talk about Zika. I didn't talk about Ebola. I didn't talk about South China Sea Islands. I didn't talk about Sony cyber attacks, OPM data breaches, North Korean missile launches, North Korean nuclear explosions. I didn't talk about Paris or Brussels attacks. I didn't talk about refugees out of the Middle East. because none of that had happened, and that's in the last 3 years. So the big takeaway is we're going through, I think, 4 major thrusts of change: politically, economically, socially, and technologically, and they're happening globally. Any one of those thrusts are hard. The convergence of all 4 of those make it for an exponentially disruptive time in our nation's history. And so those impacts, I think, are clear. If I go to the other one, this convergence of technology, I think that's kind of flaming the things. Today, bandwidth doubles about every year. So said another way, bandwidth today is 1,000 times more than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, nobody had a smartphone. Well, I think Eric might have had a smartphone. He was the one who was first. Nobody else had a smartphone. Right. Now we're approaching 4 billion people with a smartphone, and 90% of the world under the age of 6 has a smartphone, and how that changes this technology. And on the far side, if I just take one of the recent game changers, I think, is what's going on in artificial intelligence. There's the Chinese Go champion, as he lost to AlphaGo. Realized that happened less than 6 months ago, and since that time, Alphabet's come out with AlphaGo Zero that learned by itself, that beat AlphaGo 100-0. And so what does that mean going forward as this continues to explode on a rapid scale? So we think we have a framework for innovation and an action plan that we think can help us, and I'll go over some of those means again as how we unleash this potential going forward. Slide. So that's kind of the why. Let me now stop to go to what I see as part of the challenge, and this has been outlined by this group so well before, and this is what I call my Aggie math. And I tell people we have a 2 problem. We're too complex, we're too hard, we're too bureaucratic, we're too regulated, we're too risk averse, we're too stovepiped, and we're too easy for others to catch up and pass us up unless we change. The other 2 is in much of the world were areas where we said we were number 1 clearly. I would say today that case can be questioned, whether that be in artificial intelligence, hypersonics, nanotechnology, quantum computing, blockchain. There's lots of things going on across the planet that's changing on a pace and scale. It's hard to comprehend, and so being too hard and too complex and too bureaucratic and too risk averse matched with that doesn't keep you number 1, and that's the impetus to change. Lots of this revolves around data and understanding data, and I'll talk a little bit about that too, but in our front row or second row here, we have our head of our new Chief Data Officer for the United States Air Force, and she's going to help us with some of that as we think our way through this problem and on how we do that. Next slide, please. So that's kind of this framework that we'll do and that we've laid out in our Air Force to move forward. And Josh is probably kind of saying, hey, I recognize that, because we in fact read through your 12 items on how to fix things, and this is very familiar. In fact, Josh is so popular in our Air Force that throughout our Capabilities Development Council, they've seen his video. So is our head of our air staff, and in my outer office, it's on constant replay about how do we change this differently. So Josh, you're kind of a hero, dude. But I'll start at the bottom. I just mentioned how do we change maybe the organization, and one of the areas we're looking at is this Chief Data Officer and how it interfaces with our Chief Information Officer, and how do we move data differently and understand the data. And I could go in depth on that. That's just one of many organizational changes we got under work. Other one is processes change, and I'll give an example. So today, we're standing up something called AFWorks. And quite frankly, I took the idea from Hondo Gertz, who's got what he's doing down at SoftWorks. And so how do I build a storefront so that anybody across America with an idea that involves airspace and cyber can walk in the front door, and we'll connect them to the right acquirer, operator, and tester, and be able to see if we can take that idea and spin it forward. But behind that, it connects more broadly into this ecosystem between national labs and academia and industry and across the departments to understand what that means. So that's an idea on organization and process. The bigger ones at the top, though, I think are the real key, and this panel has just talked about them, whether it be the technology, the people, and the culture, and I'll hit into those next. So let's talk technology. Our chief has kind of laid out a vision for us that he talks about, and we've changed our thinking on this from airplane systems to satellites to support systems, but basically it goes like this. Does it connect? If so, good. Can I share it? Better. And then can I learn with it? Even best. And so that's how we're trying to look at things as we connect, share, and ultimately learn. And again, all this revolves around data. I like to say for an Air Force, I want to evolve till we have an operational learning system for our Air Force. And as an example I use the example of Tesla, which I didn't know till a few months ago that Tesla has talked to every other Tesla. And so if I'm driving down the street of Washington, D.C. and I hit a pothole, the Tesla behind me now knows about that pothole. And so if it's in the auto drive mode, it will go around that pothole. If I'm in the self-driving mode, it will adjust the shocks of my car to take into account for that pothole. So if I can do that, how can I do that now more broadly and say rather than a Tesla, what if I thought about that same way with a Humvee or an MRAP or any type of ground vehicle? And if I can do that with ground vehicles, why can't I do that with air vehicles? Why can't I connect all of our airplanes that fly that share data seamlessly? And if I can do it with ground vehicles and air vehicles, why can't I do that with space vehicles? And then why can't I connect all those three layers? And ultimately, how do I build a learning system to get after what you just described? It's sharing information real time about what's happening and being able to adapt to it. And so I say, bring on R2-D2. Right, that's what I want to try and get to. In parallel to that, we're going to work, the Secretary has undertaken a big effort to look at our S&T portfolio and how we do S&T, science and technology across our research and development. So I liken this back to what General Hap Arnold did with Von Karman in the late 40s and 50s timeframe. It started a tech boom that lasted for 50 years. So we're going to undertake this. We think it'll take several months to about a year, but that's one of the big efforts we got going underway about technology. Next slide, people. Next slide is about people. And you'll see a picture there of some pretty famous folks. But how do we broadly galvanize a population to service? In service, I would like service to our Air Force, but to the Department of Defense. Right? And so there's a value proposition going forward here that says, I use our Air Force as an example, that we start with good people. And then they work with some amazing people and amazing technology to do really important things to make a difference for our nation and our Air Force. That's kind of our value proposition. But we take guys like Jimmy Doolittle there on the left. And you look at what he did, a famous Doolittle Raider, April 18th, 1942, to then be the 8th Air Force commander leading our bomber forces in Europe. He went from lieutenant colonel to lieutenant general in 801 days, 2.2 years. Right? Today, that takes about 20 years. So how do I think differently about this? How do I attract, recruit, retain talent on a different scale, much like how do we incentivize folks like Jimmy Doolittle? The other one is Chris Lynch, and I dig his uniform. I laugh every time I see it. That is his uniform, even when he's meeting with the SecDef. Right? That's his total number of days of government service before he came in to run the Defense Digital Service, 0. Right? So he was a star in the industry, really well thought of. Now he's running our Defense Digital Service, right? Bringing some amazing ideas into the way we think about software and digital design across our Department of Defense. We need more of that. Lastly, how do we take into account, that's our Chief Master Sergeant Air Force, Khalith Wright, right? He's an amazing warrior, amazing leader. He's an airman's airman, right? How do we continue, but he's been in 28 years serving. How do we match all three of those and the talent and be able to inspire that talent and keep that talent and move our Air Force forward? So in our front row here is Gina Grosso. She runs our A1 and our personnel HR for the Air Force. We're really thinking hard about how we do this talent management across our Air Force. Lastly, last slide, please. And as it was mentioned, it's about culture. And how do we change this culture? And how do we change this risk aversion in this culture? And the Secretary's come on record and said, hey, I'm going out, I'm throwing a party, I'm buying the champagne and the cake, and I'm going out to the first program office that comes to me and shows me how they failed forward, right? Because I want to celebrate that. I want the people to see this, right? We have to embrace this and move forward. We cannot be so risk averse and risk tolerant. And I agree completely that we're actually, all we're doing is moving the risk to somebody else. So we're going to, start from the top, starts from the leadership and this, doing that, and I certainly know our Secretary gets it with that. But I think we broadly across the Department of Defense walked away from accepting risk the way we used to, and we got to change the way we do that. I'd also say we're getting some help. I show the legal symbol over there in terms of how do we balance things, but congressional help of today, every competition gets protested. Right? Just adds time to the process. I get a 100-day delay in every competition. And then as Josh has talked about before with our budget process in the department, you know, I think he used the words, it's either fratricide or suicide is how we move programs forward. But having a stable, predictable budget moving forward is also really important as we build a future that we can depend on going forward. And as we start this year, we're also, again, starting under the 10th year of a continuing resolution. Right? We've got to change how we do the process. So we're looking broadly at this, as you saw, this framework, but it starts with culture, people, technology, organizational process to change the way we do business. We get it. I can tell you the sense of urgency is there. I see what's happening globally. We know we have to change. That's as the bottom line as I can be on this. So to the group here, we really value your expertise. We value your leadership, and we look forward to partnering with you moving forward on this. Thank you for your support.
Thank you. And General, thank you for driving this so hard, and congratulations on AvWorks.
Thank you very much, sir. In your programs, you'll see we were going to hear from Captain Brunette from the Navy. Unfortunately, Captain Brunette had to remain in Norfolk for a mission requirement. So one of his colleagues has been invited to speak about the same topic. I invite Petty Officer First Class Richard Walsh from the U.S. Navy.
This is amazing. So I want to say thank you for letting me speak. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I want to thank two people really quick. Vice Admiral Breckenridge for the top cover that he's given us. First of all, anything that you see, any of these innovative efforts that are shown, for example, Captain Chris Wood's project with Nextlog, that wouldn't be possible without top-level top cover. Nothing happens without top cover. So in the case of Vice Admiral Breckenridge, he gave us that top cover. Also, Captain Brunette gave us the more strategic and a lot of leash to be able to engage. Also want to thank one more person. Lieutenant John Hawley, are you in here? In the back. So Lieutenant Hawley was critical in the development of Illuminate and is an absolute rock star. And thank you very much. So Illuminate, how did this come to be? A few years ago, the Chief of Naval Operations published a document called the Design for Maintaining Maritime Superiority. In that design, there are 4 different lines of effort. One of those lines of effort was a little squishier than the others and a little vague. So what we did is we sat there and we read this high-velocity learning concept, and we started thinking, okay, there are lots of different applications of innovation out there. There's Lean Six Sigma, there's design thinking, there are all these different tools, TRIZ, for example. But almost all of them are focused entirely around a process or a project or an item or a technology. Very few of them are focused on the individual. So what we did is we put together a curriculum that was focused really primarily on the person and the innovator first, and then the technology or the product on the back end. So instead of, in the case of Lean Six Sigma, where you're sitting and you're looking at a process or trying to design something that optimizes for efficiency or is a new technology, you're really focusing on developing the person first, and then that person can generate lots of other good ideas instead of just one-off a good idea. So what we started doing is we started experimenting with using TED Talks and blending that with a Stanford design thinking model. And what we did is we went out to Japan and actually trained, I don't know, how many people out there? What, 1,000? Something like that? Okay, so factored all in, we touched about 1,000 people in about 2 weeks. And what we realized pretty quickly is that with just that one approach, there was an incredible appetite across the board for it. All throughout the services, there's this hunger for a lot of people that are at the bottom of the organization but really have no idea where to start. There's no point of departure for how do they get an idea to move through the system. So what we came up with is we came up with how to really lay out this course, and also a book that has now been published all over the Navy and Marine Corps called Illuminate, right? This document, basically like a hitchhiker's guide to naval innovation. And it's touched thousands of people now, okay? But there are a couple things that are missing from it, and that's what I want to talk to you guys about. First of all, there is not a consistent sort of training process for leadership on how do you create innovative organizations? How do you create these environments? For example, commanding officers in the Navy, when they go through that pipeline, the bulk of their training over and over again that's beating their head is SAPR, okay? Sexual assault prevention. It focuses nothing about really creating these kind of environments. And you see that manifesting itself all over the organization. Leaders don't necessarily know how to do this, okay? On top of that, there's zero incentive in the military for the middle levels of management to move these ideas. It's kind of like there are these two pyramids, right, with authority at the top and then visibility, and there's a choke point in the middle of the organization where information flows. And if you want innovation to occur, you need to optimize that flow of information through the middle of the organization because there's a choke point there, okay? That's the reason innovation doesn't happen. So then you say, okay, well, why doesn't it happen, okay? If you go back, Clayton Christensen talks about in the innovator's dilemma, right, these S-shaped market penetration curves, okay? As you take an approach, as you approach dominance, in the case of the military, I would say we're actually starting to come up towards the top of our game. At that moment, you are the weakest because you're optimized against risk. So if you look at the way in which we promote our leaders, one of the things they talked about earlier, zero defect mentality. It's killing us, okay? The fact that we have no incentive to embrace risk really destroys innovation inside the military. The second thing, this up or out mentality forces people to literally just try and make it as long as they possibly can without screwing up and getting fired. Okay? And then you end up getting this sort of Peter Principle effect. Okay? So what do we do? What's actionable from a senior position? I propose a couple of different things. First of all, the way in which we do our exercises, the way in which we do our audits, the way in which we measure ourselves, we're really just trying to maintain the status quo. Well, we need to get away from that and get towards something like a Kobayashi Maru. Are you familiar with the Kobayashi Maru, right? So this idea that our exercises and our audits should be designed to break the system every single time. And we should be optimized, we should create objectives that are impossible to achieve, standards that are impossible to achieve. So everyone is in the red, basically. And then once somebody, or at least using conventional tactics, everybody should be in the red. And then somebody, somewhere, is going to figure out a way to do it. And when they do, that's the standard. How do you take whatever approach they took, how do you make it legal, how do you make it consistent, how do you standardize it across the force? And then you move the bar again, okay? Right now, I'll give you a quick example. On a ship, I deployed on back-to-back deployments back in 2013. And we would go through these exercises in preparation for damage control before the audit teams came out. One, we know what questions they're asking before they get there, okay? We practice tons. So when there's any sort of exercise, we know the script, and we practice the script over and over again. So if you change anything in the script, for example, if you say it's a missile coming in versus a torpedo, the people going out to do the investigation and to figure out where the strike was will start on the waterline, work their way up, because it's muscle memory. Okay? They're not thinking about it. It's just rote memorization because we know the script. We have to get away from that. Okay? We need to challenge the force, and every time we do an exercise, break it. Secondly, when it comes to funding lines, a lot of organizations, a lot of senior leaders talk about how innovation is important, and they talk about things that they're doing. Okay, cool. But I will tell you what it is incredibly important to produce protected funding lines for innovation. Money talks a lot louder than words. All right, thank you.
Excellent, thank you so much. Next we'd like from Lieutenant Colonel Joe Salinas, U.S. Army Special Operations Command.
Thank you, Josh. Aaron, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Really, this is my first attendance to one of these meetings and didn't know what to expect. I had some prepared comments, but after hearing the board speak, I'm going to go a little off script in an attempt to address, possibly validate from more of a ground level some of the recommendations that you're putting forward. Starting with, it was very affirming to hear how much culture was talked about here. I'll use a personal example here. My team, within Army Special Operations, for a number of years have been charged with focusing on problems that don't have traditional solutions. At a recent offsite a couple years ago, we were trying to get to the bottom of what made us successful in the series of activities that we took place. And my intel analyst stood up and said, well, you know, sir, let's be honest. I mean, we're a bunch of losers. I mean, Mark over there, he blew his hand off in a training accident. He can't go back on a team. You're a Terminal 05. You've got nowhere to go. And as I'm kind of taking a step back from this, he says, but listen to me. We're a special bunch of losers. None of us are beholden to any kind of requirements, any career timelines, milestones, and so we're able at our level to make decisions and take a calculated amount of risk that allows us to come up with some things that we might not have arrived at otherwise. Mr. Midian, to your comment about the necessity to start moving toward an objective, even though it's not very well defined, we use the analogy of a wind cone. In military freefall operations, imagine a cone extending from the point of impact on the drop zone up to altitude. It's obviously wider at the top than it is at the bottom. 25,000 feet you get out. If you maintain your cone, you have a lot of flexibility at the top, but not a lot of fidelity on where you're going. As you approach the drop zone, you have that fidelity, but your flexibility is restricted. We like to use that analogy in terms of a lot of our innovative initiatives. At some point, you need to get out of the plane, even though you don't know. Some of the challenges to this include our approach to risk. In Army Special very, very hard line with respect to risk. Too often, that approach translates into our acquisition strategy, where we need to have the perfect solution before we'll take the first step out the door. Again, using the wind cone analogy, sometimes we have to take that step, even though clarity is not defined. The awareness and access to the solutions. And I'll thank Jeff Bezos for this illustration. In December 2013, when he announced Amazon drone delivery, my commander turned to me and said, why can't we do that? Several months later, in 2014, we did execute a drone delivery, delivering a cell phone across enemy lines. It didn't meet all our performance objectives. We wanted 10K, we got 5. But it started us out down a road, at which point certain numbers of us asked the question, well, what happens when this starts being done to us? And the prevailing attitude at the time, this is 2014, said, well, drones they're toys. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? And I'm here to tell you, in 2017, the worst that can happen is U.S. service members returning from Syria saying, we don't own the airspace under 3,500 feet. That hasn't been said since Korea, and that's significant. And it is a significant challenge. And we find ourselves right now, the word used here was reactive. We are trying to deploy counter drone solutions, and the pace at which technology is progressing, thanks to DJI and others, is guaranteeing that by the time our solutions hit the ground, they're already obsolete. They've already gone to different control protocol, different autonomous flight patterns, making it very, very difficult. Process has been mentioned by everyone, and the illustration I'll give there, recent conversation with a small Silicon Valley startup out in California. This individual had some interesting technology with respect to how to target and manipulate blockchain. I said, this is great. Have you talked to Cybercom? His body language told the story. He said, they told me to write a white paper and they'd get back to me in 18 months. He goes, I'm a Silicon Valley startup. I need to make payroll. I'm not going to be here next month. And particularly when it comes to a lot of the non-traditional performers who hold the technology that is rapidly, and here's the point, the advancement and proliferation of commercial technology is rapidly approaching the level of technology that we formerly only were to expect from proprietary government state ownership. And so we have to get better about getting into these non-traditional performers. And of course, as the petty officer mentioned, the tension between exploration and exploitation has to be addressed. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, sir. Next, we're going to hear from Captain Chris Benson, U.S. Air Force.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Like you said, I'm Captain Chris Benson. I'm one of the creators of the Air Force Technology Accelerator. And the Air Force Technology Accelerator, what we do is we work with other DoD innovation organizations and with small non-traditional companies to create options for the DoD. Options that are technically viable, that are operationally useful, and we think pretty importantly, financially sustainable. And we do this by using the commercial technology accelerator model that's been used widely throughout the country and in Silicon Valley and other places. Now, one of the hardest parts of our job is actually not just finding these options and creating them, but working with the traditional acquisition professionals within the DoD to help integrate them. We need to be able to quickly integrate these options in the future when and where they are needed. And so that's one of the hardest parts of our job. So one of the things that I want to talk about more than just what we're doing is how we got here. So we started out 16 months ago as just a few junior officers and an idea, and now here we are in October, and we kind of created our own jobs, and we are running our own idea and actually getting to see it through to execution based upon our own ideas and our own passion. And so I think that story is a little bit interesting. It kind of walked through three different steps, or three different phases. The first phase being working nights and weekends. The second phase, working part-time. And now the third phase, which is really nice, is working full-time on this idea to really see where we can take it. So we started working nights and weekends. This idea started back at Squadron Officers School down at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. And it started off with a request from then Commandant Brigadier General Goodfellow, who's been an amazing supporter of ours throughout the whole process. And we answered a question on how should the Air Force work better on innovation, and we sat in our 5-week school, and we worked in our dorm rooms and worked away on this idea and came up with an idea that we thought was pretty good. And so we kind of were trying to follow the idea of the entrepreneur hacking away in their college dorm room while we were kind of hacking away in our Air Force dorm rooms in Alabama. So after we left, it was great. We got the attention of a one-star who was helping us, and that's when night and weekends really came around. And that's where what we did there is talked with anybody and anybody who would listen, everybody and anybody who would listen. And that's where this network of DoD innovators that is starting to emerge and burgeon, and a lot of the people in this room are a part of that network. And that was really, really critical for us to be able to kind of beat up our idea and to get a lot of feedback. And we had some people who really liked it and other people who didn't like it as much. We got some pretty tough feedback from a 3-star general one time, and then we had to keep moving forward on that one. So the next step we went into is the working part-time. So eventually you get to a point where you got to jump out of the plane, right? So we felt like we had a solid idea, and we went around, okay, how do you get resources for this? And so we didn't get resources from kind of a top-down approach. We looked for people and for financial resources by going around and talking to people who actually had these similar kind of problems that we were talking about. So for example, one of our programs is we're going to be running in January of next year is going to be focused on autonomous technologies and actually counter-drone technologies. So that's going to be running in Boston from January until April, and that's going to be run with a company called Techstars. And so we went around the country and talked with folks who had the same counter-drone issue, and we found people who wanted to work with us, and and found other officers and other acquisition professionals and engineers and lawyers who wanted to work on it, and they just chose to join our team. And then we also worked to raise the resources we need financially to be able to execute that. That's really nice because it keeps us accountable to somebody who has an actual mission need, and also it means that we're bringing in that kind of mainstream organization, those mainstream users and acquisition professionals at the very beginning of the process, so that we can help with, they can be involved in the whole process to help with the integration as you go along in the final steps. Now the final step really is now the full-time aspect, and that's where, and General Wilson, thank you, I have to thank you, sir, is with AFWorks. So there's a certain point in time where working part-time and asking for resources, going around with the proverbial tin cup, then becomes kind of an exercise in it can be frustrating. And so you eventually need a place to live, right? And so AFWorks has provided us a home to live in. And that's where we're living in nowadays. And one of the things that I have to say to the credit of leadership is when we came in, it wasn't like, okay, now you guys are here, and now we're going to start telling you this is how you innovate and going from X, Y to Z. What they were saying is we're here to provide you a top cover, provide you with mentorship, strategic guidance, and support within the organization that we have. And so, once again, we're excited to start up our program here in January of next year. And I think this process of starting out with nights and weekends, going to part-time, going to full-time, is going to be the first of many kind of entrepreneurial stories within the DoD that we'll see in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Our final speaker, Captain Chris Wood, United States Marine Corps.
Thanks, Josh. And I just want to start by expressing our sincere appreciation from the Marine Corps just to be able to be here to present, both with the board. Josh, thank you for being here with the esteemed audience, both with the public and the Department of Defense. A great honor. So Josh, a few weeks ago, said, I'd like you to come speak about what we've been doing for the past couple of years within what we call Next Generation Logistics, NextLog, our cell and headquarters Marine Corps, looking at future logistics technologies. So I asked Josh, do you want the good news story or do you want the bad news story? He said, you pick. So I'll tell a little bit of both, but I think I am going to go a little off the cuff with some of the things that I've heard here today, because we've lived a lot of what's been recommended, sometimes to success and sometimes to failure, sometimes failing forward, sometimes failing backwards. So our cell, we've been very privileged to have that top cover, to have a gentleman by the name of Lieutenant General Mike Dana, who's put out the runway, I think, for us to go and try some things out. So we've taken a team of 5, and we've been given incredible autonomy to explore these logistics technology spaces, to exploit them through real-time, continuous experimentation anywhere and everywhere we can, whether it's giving it to a very tactical level and just seeing how it goes, or whether it's large-scale experimentation into some of the international exercises that we've done. And then we've transitioned those capabilities into either new requirements, into future concepts, into programs of record, into small S&T investments. But we've been able to do that fairly well within our logistics technology space. What I think is most impressive, though, is that we've actually gotten to POM repeatedly through our efforts. So we've undertaken about 50 initiatives within our cell. That has allowed us to put together about a $35 million budget within the POM. So just in the past 2 years, cobbling together money, what Chris said, the 10-cup strategy. It does work, and that's one of the great advantages of the Department of Defense, is that we do have incredible resources through our research and development labs, through our innovation organizations, and many of them are certainly represented here today. But by tapping into those, by exploiting those and using them and putting them to the benefit of some of these new ways of doing business through lean startup, through design thinking, through crowdsourcing, you really create an entire new level of value, and you get to those POM initiatives. And almost everything we've done, we've got about a 40% transition rate of things moving through our cell and getting to a POM. So it can work, it does work, it's painful, and it's certainly different, and we're certainly chartering a new win. How we do that within the team is an extremely flat team. We have a colonel, we have a GS-15, we have a GS-14, we have a master gunnery sergeant, but we're flat, extremely flat. And that allows us to make decisions on the fly. Anybody can make very critical decisions relative to our team. We serve directly under our Lieutenant General Dana, our 3-star. But what that has provided us the ability to do is go from those ideas to capabilities within these 6 to 18-month timelines, and to keep up with the pace of technology change. Because what is happening with commercial industry, particularly logistics technologies, is they're mature, right? Industry's been using these things for years, in some cases decades, and the Marine Corps at least, and I think true to some extent for the rest of the services, we just haven't necessarily paid attention to them. And we just haven't grabbed them, we haven't figured out how to adopt them into our department. We haven't prioritized them as an investment. And because of that, we are now at a really neat opportunity to provide some leapfrog capabilities to skip generations of technologies and move forward. And we've done that within our office. We've taken 3D printers, put them in the field, and actually solved problems in combat environments. We've in-field mission customized drones that they've put into a combat environment, used effectively, adapted it, integrated a new sensor, put it back in the field the next day. That is all possible. It's all mature. We've taken cargo drones, to Lieutenant Colonel Salinas' point, 5-pound drones, 50-pound drones, from Army RDEC here in the audience, 300-pound drones. And we are flying those right now in the field, not forward deployed in that case, but in a developmental role. We're starting to understand our concepts, starting to understand the requirements. And by pushing aggressively forward in that way, vice pushing simply from the paperwork, simply from a PowerPoint, you end up accelerating things much faster. You end up saving a whole lot of money and time because you're not wasting time and you're not wasting money on whether or not something might work. You simply go find out if it does or not, and whether or not that's solvable through technology development. The partnerships we've been able to leverage, both with the OSD offices, such as Defense Innovation Unit, such as Defense Innovation Board, Defense Digital Services. I mean, everybody is fairly plugged into these things. And what we're trying to do as a service sponsor is to be able to continue to build off of those. And I think we've done a fairly effective job of doing that, as well as integrating with our research and development enterprise, which is a vastly undertapped resource where we've got huge amounts of talent and engineering expertise that we can put to bear against our problems. But we have to talk about transitioning and building new pathways that keep up with the pace of technology. And I think most importantly, we've been able to balance the chaos and the messiness of innovation, which is absolutely a real thing. If you're truly pushing it, it's going to be uncertain. It's going to be frustrating. It is nights and weekends, even after you get full-time. Sorry, Chris. But you have to continue to push that edge. You have to feel uncomfortable to know that you are going as far as you need to go. Some of the bad news, I think, that we've encountered is that we are very concerned about how we're employing JSIDs and FAR. Correct that there are creative ways to move through that, and the SAGEs, of which we have in our office, and that's why we have that structure, with GS-15s, with kernels. You can be creative in how you employ that, but we just don't know how to do it. And we haven't necessarily been told, or incentivized certainly, to do that. And what we end up fighting is not necessarily the rate of change, but we fight the rate of obsolescence. And I think that's a nuance that a lot of people lose, is that I'm not necessarily trying to get the latest and greatest of something. I'm simply trying to get something that is not the worst possible of the solution. I mean, it's true. That warfighter comment about we're transferring risk to the warfighter, anybody in here who's worn a uniform, I would argue for the past 20, 30 years has lived that and felt that. And we do absorb that risk. It's just a risk that, as military men and women, we don't say anything about and we charge on. I think we need to start having that harder conversation about where should we be accepting risk. The culture differences are pretty stark. Our office spends a lot of time out there with innovative organizations, whether it's the small business hanging out in a garage, or whether it's the large, the folks like UPS, the Amazons, the Googles, the Alphabets, that are really trying to deliberately instantiate culture. And it's much easier when you've done that from the get-go and you haven't lost it over time. And I feel like in some ways we've begun to lose some of that spirit. I do think we can get it back. I do think it requires significant rudder changes to how we're looking at things. I think, personally, not the opinion of the United States Marine Corps, but the same way that we have looked at emergent battlefield capabilities and employing those in order to combat our adversaries, we have to start looking at the way that we adapt our capabilities, the way that we adopt them at a service-wide scale, not at a prototype, not at an experiment. That must become critical and core to what we as a warfighting institution do. And I don't think we're going to get there unless we are very strategic and very planned about how we do that across the department. Thanks for your time.
You know, I think I can speak for the entire board when every time we deal with the military, our greatest asset are the leaders of the military. I mean, what an extraordinary set of presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Michael, we'll turn to you to give us an update on the Science and Technology Subcommittee.
I'll be brief. Before I say, I'm an experimental physicist long ago, and I live by the motto that says, when your life depends on it, don't trust theory. Now I have to go buy, thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Salinas, now I have to go buy a very large car so I can have a license plate that says at some point you just have to jump out of the plane. So I think keep that in mind because it's relevant to the discussion that I'll have next. So there is an S&T subcommittee that Richard Murray and I co-chair. Last year we spent a lot of time looking at not the specifics of what science is being done and whether that's right or wrong. That's not our job. The issue that we have been looking at is how innovation around the way S&T gets done within the services and what we can offer from an outside perspective. As we go into the second year, there are a series of things that come together around software for sort of interrelated ideas, but the primary focus that we have now going forward relates to how the DoD develops software. And I want you to think about software really quite broadly. Software not just from mission-critical embedded software inside a weapon system. To use another of Milo's great phrases, we have lots and lots of weapon systems that we think are a piece of hardware or a vehicle, and in Milo's phrase, they're really software objects that deliver capability. So that's one end, but then think about software much more broadly. The software that allows us to move people around, the software that allows us to manage careers. All of those are being done in a way that we collectively have done software for a very long time. And our priority here as we go through the next year is to look at how the DoD can and should change the way it develops and buys software writ large. Software challenges have come up constantly in the conversations we have had everywhere we go. They range from, I'm using an old system and it's going to take me 3 years before the next rev comes up, to there are new ways of doing, some of which you heard about today, relative to the way we now deliver software, including a mentality that first looks at where I can develop software that does not have to be 100% right the first time it goes out the door, and how I learn from the software and learn from the people using the software and make those changes. So the kinds of questions we will explore this year relate to what can the DoD do on its own, what it is constrained to do by congressional authorities, et cetera. A theme you've heard through much of the conversation today, what authorities exist that people are not exercising in the way we acquire and develop and define software. We have an opportunity that's presented to us by this major reorganization of ATL, and what that's going to mean both for the DDRE side and how it fosters innovation in the software environment and delivering capability and looking at future capability, but also on the acquisition side. So how do we ensure that software across the board has access to the modern skills, the modern tools, and the modern methods that the industry uses to deliver an economy that in many ways is not an economy that's just an easy app on a phone. Think about all of the major software companies that you know and love and the critical infrastructure they deliver to the country and to the world. So the methods and analogies all work. We'll look at case studies from a couple of different services on some major and minor programs to be able to deliver some recommendations and hopefully come up with a blueprint that can guide the software acquisition process itself and guide the development in DDRE of the skills and technologies and future systems that we need. So that's our primary focus. We will have connection to 3 other topics in the S&T subcommittee that we have already made recommendations and efforts around. One of those relates to cyber and network vulnerabilities that we've been asked to do some specific contributions to in the way the DoD develops its cybersecurity architecture. Data as a critical and strategic weapon. We have talked about that in our previous meetings. And then finally, we continue to work on this artificial intelligence machine learning center of competence, center of expertise, choose whatever word you want because we haven't defined a word for it yet, but a place where a central capability to provide artificial intelligence and machine learning skills, capabilities, data sets, training sets, et cetera, for the department as a whole. So that's what we have in plans. Let me see if Richard has any quick comments you want to make.
No, I think you covered it.
Great. And Josh, I'll turn it back to you.
Excellent, thank you very much.
Are there questions from the board? We might.
So we are going to be taking some public comments after a quick update from me. So you should raise your hand if you haven't yet received a comment card, and a member of our team will bring one to you. If you do have a comment card, you can pass them to the aisles, and they will bring them to me. We're running about 7 or 8 minutes behind schedule, so I apologize in advance. We will not be able to get to everyone, but you do have our email address in your program, and the board does read 100% of the comments we receive over email. So let me move now to an implementation update. Thanks, Rita, for the next slide. And the next one after that. Excellent. So first, a few points of clarification so we're all on the same page. Federal advisory committees provide advice to senior leaders in the department. They have no authority to implement, but the information that you provide is of great use to our leaders, many of whom are here today and others as well. And so it's important that we reflect back to you what is being done with the advice that you receive. So I wanted to give you all an update from the department to you, the board members, to highlight just a small number of examples in addition to the remarkable examples we heard from our subject matter experts who are representing their views and experience. And the next opportunity to provide such an update will be at our next public meeting, which will be in January 2018. Next slide. And then we'll take the note after that. Great, we'll jump right in. So the first recommendation the board made was on building innovation capacity in the workforce and establishing a chief innovation officer to oversee that mission. Some of the ideas we talked about today, of course, amplify and build on that original idea. One of the examples that we've seen here is that an ISR team is building really a grassroots effort to experiment with new methods of doing their ISR, processing, exploitation, and dissemination method. And it's a great example of the sort of grassroots innovation we want to see, and senior leaders providing that top cover that we heard about to help them develop the tools on their own to try new ways of accomplishing their mission. That's the sort of grassroots driven innovation that I think, were hoping to incentivize in the first recommendation you read. Next slide. Another recommendation that came that Adam really spearheaded and all the board members endorsed was embracing a culture of experimentation and the sort of A/B testing mentality that's driven in industry and figuring out how to apply that to our mission. And we uncovered many examples of this, but three that really seemed like they deserve to be highlighted for you. The first is the Air Force's Air Mobility Command is looking at a new initiative of how to experiment with a new personnel policy that would help close a pilot shortage. And we really liked the way in which this was viewed as a pilot for a small group to do iteration on this idea and see how it works before scaling it. And so it was a good way of applying this kind of experimental approach to a really tough personnel problem the Air Force is facing. There is a special purpose unit in the Marine Corps that's been designed specifically to use new weapons, new systems, and new tactics. And they are 3D printing and the sorts of things that we heard from Chris as an example of how they're using this in the field, and then they have a pipeline to get lessons learned rapidly back to the headquarters staff of the Marine Corps. And another example of this is the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment, which is a similar role. So we've encountered a few places where individual units are designated to run experiments at a much faster rate of iteration to try to increase the velocity of learning. I think that's excellent.
Most leaders, General Milley among them. So that will be an issue for the board to watch and continue to look at to see how those ideas about accelerating the acquisition process and embracing the risk is being adopted by the Army. With respect to
number 10, computing power and bandwidth, which is one of these things that's really been connected to almost all of the recommendations the board's made related to data, software
technology, artificial intelligence, so just the availability of the
compute resources to do the kind of work that you've been describing. We've seen a number of notable examples.
There. First, there was a public memo that the Deputy Secretary of Defense has signed out on adopting cloud computing across the enterprise. We've encountered a number of places across the department where there
are cloud initiatives, but that was a notable one that there's an enterprise look at how to consolidate that now. Defense Logistics Agency is also looking at a very wide commercial cloud contract, looking at how to do some of that innovative logistics and seeing how they can use the additional bandwidth
for accelerating data sharing and interoperability to move material faster across the world. And there was also a recent announcement from Navy, a broad push to do a Navy-wide cloud.
Infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So three very good examples of people moving out on recommendations the board started to make about a year ago. And then with respect to data, of course, how to instrument the soldiers themselves and use that data to draw inferences that would improve their performance in the field. So really interesting work there. And then the last two examples that we wanted to underscore, again, building on this, the latest recommendation from the board on data, is we have almost here in the front row the Air Force's Chief Data Officer that you heard from General Wilson, an organizational approach to consolidating its efforts. Major General Kreider comes from a lot of commercial experience as a reservist, bringing that to the Air Force, trying to integrate many disparate lines of effort in the Air Force to accomplish some of the vision General Wilson laid out. And last, the Navy has also established their own digital warfare office, which is again trying to focus on a series of pilot initiatives around data, compute, and bandwidth to try to figure out what is the future of digital warfare in the maritime domain look like. So I just wanted to highlight these for your attention. And now, I want to turn it back to the board. If there's any comments on that, any reactions?
My reaction is we're at least making the obvious progress. Right. I know this is the lowest hanging fruit. People are beginning. The question is, how do we get to the higher level and even more strategic things, which take a lot more energy from the organization? Other comments?
Great. So everyone, we're really serious about 2 minutes. We want to hear from as many of you as possible. I will announce the speaker, and then I will announce who's on deck, so you can make your way towards the front. First, we'll hear from Lieutenant John Hawley. And on deck behind him, Jamie Durnan.
You have to run. You have to run to your speech.
I wasn't listening to you because I was going to talk real quick. Lieutenant John Hawley, Fleet Forces Command. On behalf of Captain Chris Brunette and Vice Admiral Breckenridge, apologize for Captain Brunette not being able to make it. He probably wanted to be here more than anybody. So I wanted to say that. And to keep this under 2 minutes, I'm going to use my notes. Very unconventional over here, but very honored to be speaking in front of you. Thank you very much. So when Rich and I created the course, the Illuminate course, we set out to become starfish, as it were. You cut a leg off of a starfish, and not only does the starfish regenerate another leg, but the leg regenerates another starfish, right? And we've been all over the world since Japan. We've reached a lot more people than that initial push. But now all of them are starfish and cutting off their legs to spread. And so after hearing both of you guys speak and a couple others, sharing that knowledge with you guys and that education with you guys and getting what you have for us to provide to the Navy and also the Air Force and Marine Corps, Coast Guard is very valuable, and I think we should definitely make that happen before we go. I'm going to conclude with what I think Captain Burnett would have said if he was speaking to you guys right now. Hopefully he doesn't kill me when I get back. You know, we don't have the golden ticket or pretend to have all the answers. We act as a catalyst for innovation programs to take root and as a baseline course to disrupt the status quo. And he would probably say, ask us or any of the other starfish, as it were, how you can untap the potential of your people and leverage the tacit knowledge of your organization, and hopefully together we can, excuse me, whoa, I'm done. Okay. All right, well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good job.
So I'm going to read my notes as well. So I'm a New Hampshire farmer in a technology world, and so I want to talk about speed and trust. So speed's good, no doubt about it. Faster may be better, but it's all relative. Speed is also not a birthright of the United States. We keep hearing that over and over again. So sometimes instead of going faster, we got to figure out how do we slow the other person down. Trust is one way to do it. I always say that information moves at the speed of light, but decisions move at the speed of trust. And you can't confuse them. So how do we create the trust of all the things that I've heard today that actually accelerates the decision-making inside the department? Some of that happens in industry, but I spend a lot of time in industry, and while it's great to go point to the private sector, they don't have all the answers. So, and the last thing I want to say is that, you know, everybody knows John Boyd's OODA loop. I always ask, how do you slow down John Boyd's OODA loop? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great. So I will read a comment from YouTube, and in the meantime, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Harden and then John Weiler, you are on deck. Stephen Olek from YouTube writes, I see the goal of DIUX, DIB, DDS, et cetera, to work themselves out of a job, create an innovative department. Is this a shared vision, and is there a day when we'll no longer need these groups?
All right, good morning, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Harden, AFWorks. First of all, thanks to Josh and the DIB for your commitment to the field of innovation. You literally helped save one of our initiatives. So I'm deeply appreciative for that contribution. We're seeing a groundswell in a generation, and that's refreshing and inspiring. You see, Captain Chris Benson and Chris Wood, you heard from earlier, tapping into these informal networks will build the kind of military that will give us the edge of the future. A lot of people are using innovation in their speeches, and yet as we work hard to execute these initiatives, we're still in a place where the culture requires a Herculean effort, right? If we don't get just-in-time leadership, the momentum is still killed. So I believe Congress wants us to more effectively use dual-use technologies, yet we find internal interpretations of that guidance and law so often taking narrower views of risk tolerance or hardline views of what a prototype actually is. And it's creating stumbling blocks for us today. I'm excited to see the conversations, the interactions, and the momentum, and a shift in our culture. As we see success in our Spark program, our base level peer-to-peer innovation, I can't overemphasize the benefits that we're seeing in partnering with the local community and companies by deliberately creating touch points for our airmen. It's amazing to see the inspiration that airmen come up with to solve problems when we give them the permission to innovate. 2 weeks ago, I was at Tinker Air Force Base to launch our predictive maintenance project and literally sat there and said, it's okay if we don't get the results we think we're going to get, but give you permission to fail, to innovate. And literally, there was a sigh of relief in the room. And the group commander came up to me and said, hey, Dave, thank you so much for just giving us the permission to go learn everything that we can learn about this and apply it and not worry so much that we had to get an 85% success rate. And so I think that's the key to our future. I look forward to the Defense Innovation Board continuing to challenge our creativity in coming up with contractual ways to solve our project problems and advise us on how we can overcome our cultural challenges. Thank you so much for your contributions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we have John Weiler next and Mark Parrish on deck. And if you have comment requests, please pass them forward.
Thank all of you for wonderful insights. This has been a great experience to see DoD finally get over some of its challenges. I'm part of a think tank called the IT Acquisition Advisory Council that Mike Wynn helped stand up in 2007. And our sole purpose was to break the bonds of DoD into its defense industrial-based dependency. So we established 24 partnerships with non-defense industries, reaching 108,000 companies. And the purpose was saying, hey, innovation's already happening. How do you just find it and ingest? And in doing so, we also found processes that were better than the waterfall processes of DoD. So we think there's a big culture problem. And there's a not invented here thinking sometimes in DoD in the sectors of the acquisition core. And if we can help break through those impediments to change, including access and knowledge of those who are already innovating, and ingest that more quickly based on better decision making. Thank you.
Mark next and James Cloninger after that.
Hello, everyone. My startup, helpfirst.com, is at the 1776 location in downtown DC. Our U.S. Defense Department is one of the largest funders of scientific research, of medical research. When you look at like prostate cancer, the DoD is at the forefront. But many people aren't aware of what all the Defense Department does. So what my platform does is it empowers consumers through impact-driven deals, and it makes the process social. I call it cause-based social commerce. And I think we can do a much better job of communicating all the great work that the Defense Department does, and we can build partnerships between our citizens and our great DoD in a social process. At the end of the day, the Defense Department, our U.S. Defense Department, is truly a global force for good. And I think we can do a better job of communicating the mission and creating partnerships between our citizens and our warfighters. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks. We have James next and then Don Miller after that.
I'm James Cloninger from Motif. We're also here at 1776. I had two comments. They'll be quick. The first one was to Eric's last comment about the bigger picture, and maybe this makes me least popular person in the room, but we used to have the War Department, and now we have lots of services and lots of commands. And I wonder if there's ever, that's the kind of level of thing that we need to look at, you know, the inefficiencies and redundancies of multiple services and things. I know there's a lot of history and culture involved there, but just another comment. And then the other thing that's probably more down my line of work is the real property accountability, or real estate in the Department of Defense. Over 500,000 buildings and nearly $10 trillion of plant replacement value. It's a big opportunity for innovation as well, and I think if the DoD takes the lead, industry will follow.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Don Miller. I work at Sandbox here. We're part of 1776, and I had a question on, I agree with you that speed is an important factor in innovation, but a lot of the times what we do is we help keep the military community connected via our platform. And a lot of the problems we face is the bureaucracy of being able to say, okay, we have this new product, we want to be able to innovate. I'm curious to see how some of these initiatives can get through some of that bureaucracy. So, thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
very much. And there's a last call for comments. Unfortunately, we can't take questions, so please bring them forward. Paper.
A couple hands in the back there.
Yeah, we can do hands for two, we have time for two, so by show of hands, we'll pick two people.
There's a gentleman with his hand there, there's a gentleman over here.
Great, okay. Please do make sure to state your name and affiliation so we can capture that.
And you need to run up to the mic. The protocol in our meetings is you have to run, apparently.
Speed, it's all about speed.
Yes, sir. Identify yourself, please.
Hi, Chris Perron. I'm with a company called Protective Innovations, a startup. I just left the Air Force last year, had the privilege of participating in the D3 Innovation Summit, which Josh ran last year. My question is, how does a startup that has an innovative, we believe potentially game-changing product get the attention of the DoD? Even DIUX puts out solicitations. We need to find out how to get their attention when we don't meet their solicitation. The Air Force under AFRL invented a product that connects to the fire alarm system, detects gunshots, calls the police just like the fire alarm works. I know there's some stuff on the market. This is way cheaper and different. That's not the point today. Point is, the Air Force invented it. We briefed the 18L Secretary, the Undersecretary of the Air Force, General Selva at the Joint Chiefs. Everybody said it was great. It died at the GS-15 level, and now I've got a startup trying to get the Air Force's attention again to buy their own product back. What is the end point for somebody in my situation?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And yes, sir, you had your hand up. You have the last comment. So yes, you have to run. Even the 5 feet, you have to run.
My name's Chris Taylor. I'm the CEO of a company called Gavini that focuses big data and analytics on the public sector. But I also happen to be senior advisor to MD5. And I also teach co-teach the Hacking for Defense class at Georgetown. Milo, good to see you again.
Yeah.
Milo was kind enough to sit on our panel last year. Two things. One, as we start to talk about talent development, we have to consider talent outside DoD, which resides, in our case here in the DC area, the National Capital Region Consortium of graduate students. We need just as much civilian talent as we do military talent to advance the cause of national security here in the country. So perhaps just a quick pitch to any leaders out here in national security. Give us your problems, bring them to Hacking for Defense so we can put them in front of talented grad students across the country and have them work on them for you. Second thing is, let me make a pitch for the MD5s, the DIUXs, the InQTELs. We don't have enough. The vast amount of emerging technology that is not being covered by investment in the United States is crazy. Who is investing in it? People that we prefer probably wouldn't invest in it. I'm sure Siphius can attest to that. I think that we should triple DIUX's budget. I think we should quadruple MD5's budget. I think we should have 4 more InQTELs competing to cover the emerging technologies in the United States. Under 2 minutes, Joshua.
Thank you.
All
right. Any concluding remarks, Eric, or any other board members as we prepare
Any
to
other
wrap?
board member comments? Milo?
Can I just want to say, one of the things we've communicated to leadership here is, in an area where the commercial sector is actually leading innovation and driving investment, the best the department can do is get parity with others. You're never going to have a strategic advantage in an area where the commercial sector is driving advantage. So this issue about how quickly you can integrate technology and use it to solve the DoD's problems is really important. And I think we've moved into a space where many of the key technologies for future military competitiveness actually are being driven outside of the traditional government investment complex. And that is I think a deep change that I think has yet to be really internalized and is going to be a problem if it's not done properly.
A
quick historical point. And of course, Milo, you're correct, but only in the context of the fact that the IT community is a commodity today. It's a consumer-driven enterprise, and it wasn't always that. And you go back not that many decades ago, and the military led the world in their computing power and what they did with those computers. So maybe we should not even be so limited as to say this relationship with the leading commodity-driven industry of IT is where we need to stay abreast. We should even perhaps stay open to things that are not even yet commoditized, which would then represent a true singular leadership position in the world.
I don't think it's just limited to IT. There's material sciences, all sorts of areas where the commercial sector is now really driving innovation. That's a challenge for policymakers.
Other comments? You know, I've been thinking about, my personal reaction is we've got the beginnings of great success here. We've got a lot of gems that we've assembled with our partners of one kind or another here in thought. And we're beginning to see things like AvWorks coming out and with others coming. This is a strong start. It's not sufficient. And so while everyone's excited that we're beginning to make progress against a 40-year-old edifice of historical frustration with procurement, et cetera, which we've been informed about, maybe more than 40 years. It's going to take more than a few brilliant leaders in the military to address that. My sort of highest level list is the military is going to have to rethink its internal processes. It's easy to blame Congress and others and outsiders, but there's a complicated process internally which has evolved over decades. It's known as the POM, and there are other components of it, and it's impossibly complex to understand. No single individual seems to fully understand it, and that's going to require some rethinking. So rethink that. Rethinking innovation in the context of the new sets of things going on, which is largely autonomy and largely software and largely artificial intelligence. Again, we don't see enough of that, so that's another project. And then the third, which we've highlighted today, is, and I think everyone responded very strongly to this, is this cultural question of shifting from a risk-averse culture in the planning sense to a risk-seeking culture in the planning sense. We already have incredibly courageous humans. It's not a courage problem. And I think in order to do that, we have to do sort of massive consensus building. And I think Josh and his architecture for the way this is working, I think that's sort of your secret plan, is to use this as a sort of a consensus building process with all of you participating. My immediate reaction is that for our 4 recommendations, I'm having trouble counting today. Do we have 4 or 5? 4. Thank you.
They're proto recommendations.
Proto recommendations, excuse me. I think we've got to make them stronger. I think we understand roughly what we want to achieve, but we've either got to make it clear what the request is or what the action is in order to affect change, or the antibodies, as we say, they won't happen for whatever reason. And you can decide to address these issues as a leader and as a human being because it's the right thing, because you're excited about it, or you can do it based on fear, right? And Neil made the point that a lot of our reactions in NASA were really in response to what was a legitimate threat from the Soviet Union. My guess is that we will ultimately say that that threat at a technological level in terms of innovation is probably from China and the rate at which it's innovating. So with that as sort of a strong statement, Josh, how would you like to finish up?
With a round of applause for you and the
Very much.
So thank you all very much for coming. I'd ask that you please remain in your seats and give the board members a chance to exit because we're on a tight schedule. So thank you all very much for coming, and thank you again to our board members and to the team that put this event together.
That was good, yeah.